Again, this one we're going to talk about how the brain works, okay? This one's kind of fun. This is probably our most sciencey part of this, but this applies to way more than addiction, guys. This applies to stuff that is just all over the map. If you really think this through, you're going to go, oh, that's why I do that. Oh, that's why. From everything from cutting behaviors to beating your spouse to why do I eat more in the evening than I do the rest of the day? I'm not going to go into that stuff. That's a whole different set of lectures. To why do I even have panic attacks and stuff like that. But let's move on to this. Okay, first thing we want to talk about is the prefrontal cortex, this area of the brain. Now, you really got to understand these two areas of the brain, okay? The prefrontal cortex, its job is basically to be you. When I'm talking to you, I'm talking to your prefrontal cortex, okay? If I were to draw a map of your brain, I'd put this big arrow saying you are here. Okay, this is the part you think of as you. Now, what it does is it's responsible for your personality and judgment. It's the one that inhibits behaviors you don't want to do, okay? It's the one that monitors you, plans for the future. This is motivation and attention and all of those things, okay? And we're going to come back to this part, but this is the part that you think of as self. This is me, okay? It sits right here. Now, we actually know what happens if you take out this part of the brain because we've had people either stroke this out or get brain damage and lose it. And here's how they act. Major personality changes. They cannot plan for the future. They can't reason or use logic. They're inappropriate socially. They lose motivation. They lack insight. Isn't that interesting when we're talking about addiction? They lack judgment. They have very poor attention, and they can't, think about this one with addiction, they can't predict the outcomes of their actions, even when they're obvious from the outside. Anxiety and depression, and they can't inhibit compulsions. I had a patient who lost this part of his brain. It was before I was a doctor, so I guess he was a client when I was working my way through college. And anything that entered this man's head, he did. And he's now in a state mental institution. He's incredibly intelligent. He's incredibly functional. But he's considered a danger to society. Because anything that enters his head, he does. He decided, I remember once I was out with him and we were at a truck stop and he decided he wanted to go in the women's bathroom because that just seemed like an interesting place to be. And he went in. That's what happens with no prefrontal cortex, okay? The other area we got to talk about here is the limbic region. It's the center of the brain. The limbic region is completely different. It sits about right here. And if you want to know what the limbic region does, think of a horse. A horse is almost purely a limbic animal. Okay? It runs almost purely on its limbic region. The limbic region basically is to keep you alive, make sure you have babies, and make sure your babies survive. So don't die and pass on your genes. Okay? And it doesn't work with you through thoughts like the prefrontal cortex does, right? This works on your emotions, your urges, your impulses, and your sensations. Okay? This is the part when you walk up to a cliff, and as you're approaching the cliff, the limbic system will light up. And you, by the way, you can't really talk to your limbic system, and you don't get to rewrite it. If you want to rewrite your prefrontal cortex, join a religion, your prefrontal cortex will change. If you want to rewrite your limbic system, too bad. It's just not going to happen, okay? So you go up to your limbic system, or you go up to a cliff, and your limbic system is going to pick up on that. It's going to see that as a danger, and it's going to go, you know what? No. But it's not going to logic out. Well, that's a 300-foot cliff, and it's a little crumbly at the edge. You're not going to get a logical stream. You're going to get, I don't feel good. Gosh, it's going to be sensation-based. Your limbic system is going to be going, get away. But it's not going to be logicking with you. It's going to be compelling you away. And you can often override it, right? Nope, I'm going repelling. And your limbic system's going, all right, let's make his legs a little like jelly. Let's make this really uncomfortable. Maybe he'll back away and not kill us here, right? And you can't really logic your way through the limbic system super well. You can do a little bit, and we're going to talk about it. So anyway, it does all these things. It helps you acquire a mate, not get punished, preserve yourself and your family. It creates emotions. It's for survival. Now, this is the important one. I want you to really focus on this one. It detects, addresses, and remembers threats. So if you get into a situation that's dangerous, it's going to It's going to lock that in so you don't do it again. It's going to have a memory of it, okay? This is huge for behavior, by the way. And then it remembers, this one's even more important, it remembers conditions related to threats. We're going to talk about that in just a second, okay? And then it sets off the sympathetic nervous system, what we like to call the fight or flight system, okay? That's what initiates this. Especially this little spot right here called the amygdala. It's like the fire alarm for your brain. It goes, danger, 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 and kind of lets you know you're going to get yourself in trouble, okay? Now, if I were going to draw a map here, this is crazy town. All the stuff we do that we don't like about ourselves comes from this area, okay? This is the man that comes into me and says, I don't hit women, and I hit my wife again. You hear him saying my limbic system kicked in? Okay. Let's talk about this guy, okay? So I want you to imagine that you go hiking in the woods, and you're out in the woods and having a good time, and you find a cave, and the cave looks kind of interesting, okay? So you decide you're going to go in and explore this cave. And you get about halfway through this cave, and you run into this guy, okay? And there's an exchange where you exchange your life for one of your legs, okay? And you survive this, and you leave. Now, your limbic system is going to encode this experience, okay? And it's going to make sure you never do that again. So, the real problem in this encounter was bear teeth, right? That's really what got us in trouble. So you're going to have a pretty strong response to not getting near bear teeth again. Your limbic system is also going to notice all the other factors around it. So it's going to remember that bear teeth were attached to a bear, okay? You're going to have a major fear of bears. It also might tie it to other things like the cave. And it's going to spend the rest of your life going, does this look like a cave? Does this look like every situation you get in? Subconsciously, you're going to be kind of comparing, ooh, okay? It might even encode the forest as part of the threat complex, where you just have this incredible, intense fear of forests. Now, the problem is limbic systems are about as intelligent as a horse. And so it's not going to necessarily get this right and do what you would do, you being your prefrontal cortex. So you might be walking through New York City 20 years later, go into a subway, and your limbic system goes, match. It's a cave, right? Now, what experience are you going to have? You're going to have a full-on, I'm going to get eaten by a bear freak out. So the limbic system's going to start alarming, going, danger, danger, and the rest of you is going to go, we're fine. Why am I freaking out here? Because remember, this isn't conscious. You don't know why you're freaking out. And the limbic system's going, we're going to die, bear, and your prefrontal cortex is going, it's the middle of New York City. There's no bears here. Oh my gosh. Does that make sense? Do you see this disconnect between the two? Okay. So, what happens when these two regions disagree? Let's talk about this, because this is the root of compulsive behavior. Okay? When one of them says, do this, and the other says, don't. We're going to die. No, it's just a subway. No, it's a cave. No, literally, this is just a subway entrance. Okay? Now, this is a scan of an addict. Okay? Healthy brain. This is just, the brighter it is, the more activity in the brain. Healthy brain, prefrontal cortex. That's interesting. Remember, the limbic system is the part that says, ooh, she's cute. We need to have babies. The prefrontal cortex is the part that goes, and she's not your wife. Right? The limbic system is the one that says, I hate that guy. And the prefrontal cortex says, and if we punch, we go to jail. Not worth it. Right? Going offline. How's that going to look? Okay, so here's what it is. We've got our limbic area, we've got our prefrontal area, and this little thing called the amygdala is going to sense a danger. It's going to light up and tell us you're in trouble. We've got to act on something. It's going to send a message to the prefrontal cortex and it takes a minute for this to happen, and say, get moving, we got a problem, okay? The prefrontal cortex is going to assess that threat, and if it disagrees, it's going to send back a blocking, what we call an inhibitory message to the limbic system saying, nope, not a problem. So, this part of the brain says, oh my gosh, it's a snake. And it sends this let's freak out response up to this part of the brain. This part of the brain looks at it and goes, it's braided, it's tied to a bucket. That's not a snake. And it sends an inhibitory response back to the limbic system. In a person whose experiences and the interaction between these two is healthy, the limbic system will calm down and say, oh, okay, it's a rope. We're done. But there's some other scenarios that can happen, okay? This thing will light up, and it can send a message, and that didn't quite translate the way I wanted it to. It'll send a message up to this prefrontal cortex saying, we've got a problem, there's danger. And sometimes the prefrontal cortex will assess it and go, oh my gosh, that is a snake. Let's leave. And when they agree, it's going to send back an excitatory complex, and it's going to light up even stronger. So now the amygdala and the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, you're on the same page, right? And that's going to go well. So when they agree, things go very well. But sometimes, in certain situations, the limbic system will send a message. Prefrontal cortex will decide this is not scary, we're not doing this. Whatever behavior you're suggesting, I'm not going there. And the limbic system will send an inhibitory response up to the prefrontal cortex. Guys, this is huge. If I were going to write a test for this, there would be like 8 questions on this right here, okay? Understand this. Now, remember, in a intact, healthy brain where things are going well, when the prefrontal cortex says not scary, the limbic system calms down. But let me throw a scenario out for you, okay? And this is kind of a rough scenario, so I apologize. Let's say that we are a little girl who's being sexually abused at home. We're walking home on any given day from school. And as we're walking home, what's our limbic system going to start doing as we approach our house? Guys, there's a problem. Hey, it's going to happen again. Right? So our prefrontal cortex is going to look at this information and it's going to go, okay, yeah, it is. What are our options? Well, we can not go home. Is that a good solution? No, it's a terrible solution, right? That's even more dangerous. We can go home and we can tell, and if we tell, then one of two things will happen. They'll either believe us, and if they believe us, they'll destroy our family, and it will be my fault. I destroyed our family. I got him sent to jail. Or they're going to not believe us, which might even be worse, because now we just got isolated, and now we're a liar, and does that make sense? So the only other option is to live with it and to walk right back into the situation. And most of the time, that's what the prefrontal cortex is going to weigh out, and it's going to choose. And it's going to send an inhibitory response, not because it thinks everything's fine, but because it thinks this is the best we can do. We got a catch-22 situation here. And there almost always has to be a catch-22 for this to develop, by the way. Pay attention to that. And what happens then is the limbic system shuts off the prefrontal cortex. That's what you just saw in that scan, right? A prefrontal cortex going offline. Now, it can go offline a little bit, where I just sort of lose some self-control, or it can go offline entirely, where I am completely limbic. My limbic system says, hey, let's do this, and my prefrontal cortex says nothing. Okay, so there's a spectrum here. And you can't look at someone and going, you're 40% limbic and 60% prefrontal function right now. You can't do that, okay? So this is tricky as we're trying to judge people on this stuff because we don't know where they're sitting. They may be 100% prefrontal function one day, and seriously, an hour later, they're at 0 or 2% function. We even know the chemicals that do this. Norepinephrine and dopamine are what this part of the brain releases to do this. Okay? Now, some guy that's really a whole lot smarter than me, Dr. Paul MacLean, a neuroscientist, compared these two parts of the brain. The limbic region he compared to a horse, and the prefrontal cortex he compared to the rider. Now, this is a really good analogy, by the way. Think about a horse and a rider. Which one's smarter? The rider. Which one gets its way when it really, really, really wants to? It can go either way, right? But a horse is a powerful animal, right? So when our horse is totally calm, it's agreeing with us that everything's fine, we can get a lot of work done, right? We're a force to be reckoned with, a rider and a horse, right? Same with our prefrontal and our limbic system. But I want you to think about this. And this is where we really get off in addiction, guys. This is where we've been taught by Anslinger to think wrong. We're just totally wrong-headed on here. Which of these three riders would you say is the most skilled rider? If you had to guess, I know you can't get in their heads, but if you had to guess, which of these three is the most skilled rider? Okay, I'm hearing a couple different answers. I'd have to agree with you. I would say that the professional bronc buster might be the best horseman out of these three. The guy with his face in the dirt. So can we judge how good a rider someone is by whether their face is in the dirt? Is that the only criteria we use? No, we look at the horse. Raise your hand if you think you could stay on that horse. Okay, raise your hand if you think you could not use drugs if you were in that guy's body. You don't know. Because you don't know if his horse is like this, or like this, and it's not the same on any two given days. We've been handed this narrative that all addiction, all compulsive behavior is because you suck at riding horses. Right? That's the whole story we've been handed. That's part of the story. Skill in riding is part of the story. Do you think this guy could stay on this horse longer than most people? Is there value in the fact that he's a skilled rider? But all therapies, 100% almost of therapies, it's just barely under 100% that we use for addiction and compulsive behavior, focus only on the rider. They do not even acknowledge that there is a horse. Does that seem like we're a little off on that? Okay, let's keep moving. So the point is, this girl could really easily look at this guy and think, loser, look at this. How hard is it? Sit on your stupid horse. Stay in the saddle, right? It's really easy, but she doesn't know. Now, she may be, some people do fall off, I think, horses that look like that. But the key is you don't know, and neither do I. Okay? Again, that's what we're looking at. All right, now let's talk about something here. This is the next place I want to go on this. There's a guy named Maslow. He lived about half a century ago. And Maslow came out with, actually more than that, Maslow came out with a list of needs that we have in order. And this is the limbic system's programming. And he said, and these are kind of hard words so let's just use simple words because that's like psychobabble. So he said our prime directive, the base of the pyramid, the most important thing is don't die. And then the next most important thing is you got to feel safe, which is like don't die in the long term, right? You know, get enough food and shelter and things like that. And then the next one is belong. And the next one is matter. And then the top one is just be amazing. Be like the prettiest girl in school and be the best, things that are like kind of cherry on top type behaviors, okay? And the thing you got to know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that we've been teaching this to students forever. Does this make sense? Can I ask you to focus somewhere? Is that the prime directive of the human brain, the limbic system? You ever met someone who was suicidal? What part of the brain does that come from? You ever seen a mother jump in a river to save her son, who's actually a better swimmer than her? Think about this for a second. Now, let's talk a little bit more about Maslow and kind of his hierarchy, okay? One of the things he teaches is you cannot threaten somebody with something that's that's higher on the list of threats than where they currently are fighting. So you take the worst thing that's going on in their body, and you can't threaten them with something that's less than that, that's further up the pyramid. So let's take this girl. I'll show you what I mean by this. Let's take this girl. This girl is hanging out here. She doesn't have any threats down here at the base of the pyramid. Okay? We're just going to imagine that. That doesn't happen very often. But let's say she's just got the world by the tail. Her family's awesome. Everything's awesome. If I took this girl and I went up to her and said, hey, tomorrow when you go to school, I am going to make you wear the ugliest pair of shoes I can possibly find. These are going to be humiliating. I've been working at this for months trying to find a nasty pair. Would that register as a threat to her? How would she react? We'd get wailing and gnashing of teeth, and right? This is going to be a very upset young woman, right? Now, let's take another girl. Let's imagine a girl in a concentration camp. Her family's been murdered. She doesn't know if she'll be alive tomorrow. She's starving. She's hurt. She's sick. Let's go up to her and let's make the same threat. I'm going to give you the ugliest pair of shoes I can find. How's she going to respond? Yeah, that is so not a threat. Do you understand? So I threatened her right about there, didn't I? Do you see how when you're up here, that seems like an end of the world threat because it's bigger than the biggest one you're dealing with? And when you're down here, you're willing to trade higher up threats. You don't even see them, okay? Now this matters. So we just talked about the fact that this clearly isn't true. Turns out Maslow missed something. And what he missed was the base of the pyramid. This is a fairly big thing to miss, by the way, when we built our whole psychological thing on top of it. And what he actually missed comes from this area. He put it up in here. And what it turns out is human connection. That is the brain's prime directive. That's why a mother will jump off into a river knowing that she's just going to die, to try that 1 in 1,000 chance that she can save her baby. That is why people become suicidal. And we could do a whole conference on suicidal stuff too. That is why people shoot up schools. It's always that we threaten them with a tier 1 threat, a level 1 threat. And you are happy to give up level 2 when you find a level 1 threat that you can't fix. That's why people become suicidal. Okay? So level 1 threat is what? Connection. Level 2 threat is life or safety. Okay? So if you have a kid and you have a choice between abusing them physically or ignoring them, it's actually nicer to abuse them physically to their brain. Do you realize that? And we put people in jail for physical abuse, but we don't put them in jail for ignoring. It's funny because some of them are harder to spot, right? Okay, let's keep moving. So does that make sense of like why people tend to have behaviors that like technically don't make sense? You feeling a little clearer on that? And so, again, I don't think this zebra did anything that deserves 2 hoofs to the face. But I bet you in that zebra's limbic system, it makes sense. And they don't really have a prefrontal cortex that functions real well, so he's just going to do whatever comes to his head.